ZillaKami and Sos Mula, also known as City Morgue, is a group that has defined the underground scene for the past 7 years. They alone are responsible for keeping trap metal somewhat relevant in the eyes of the public, creating a new look and style that the underground has latched onto, and inspired hundreds of thousands of artists to do the exact same sound. But unfortunately, in 2024, it seems like their wave is finally at an end. With recent allegations and horrible truths coming to light, the fall of this beloved rap group seems imminent, which leads me here today, where I want to talk about the rise and fall of City Morgue. Now, I know at this point I've talked about City Morgue over 20 times. I've done videos on their beefs, I've done videos on all the scams and things going on around them, the allegations, and of course I covered their upbringing with 6 9 and everything that went on there. So look at this video as a part 2 to that one. I'm only going to be talking about their come up from 2017 and onward, a little bit about stuff in 2016, but for the most part this is going to be 2017 to 2024 from the perspective of a fan. So without further ado, let's send these two boys off by covering their story one last time in City Morgue Part 2. Let's get it. So when we last left off, it was 2017, but I do want to go back to 2016 and cover almost every single song that they dropped on SoundCloud during their come up. We can get a full scope of just how much music they were dropping during that time. After ZillaKami fell out with 6 9, he didn't drop music for a couple months, but he would end up dropping a track with the newly formed rap group known as GCSY, or God Can't Save You, which included Cameron Nazi and Subjects, and this song was called Devil Horns. This led many online to consider ZillaKami the newest member of GCSY, since he hadn't dropped any music with Sos Mula yet, not to mention that he was making vlogs with them and everything, so it definitely seemed like he fit in more with them than with Sos Mula, but he would eventually make a track with Sos as well called Go. This song was actually originally supposed to have 6 9 on it as well, but they ended up replacing him with Bala Bonds, another local New York rapper who's really not too important to the story, but definitely added a cool vibe to the song alongside the more aggressive ZillaKami and Sos Mula. That was followed up by Baddage Patch Kids and then Yuck Mouth, which was made on a Thrax beat. In fact, it was the very same Thrax beat that 6 9 would later use for Zeta Zero, leading to that whole controversy, but we'll get to that when we get there. We would then get War Dog Anthem, and then a track called Kikuzine, which was actually a diss track aimed at 6 9 Jet Grind Radio, Shrimp, and Hockey Puck, all a few weeks apart from each other. And that's because the initial plan for City Morgue to blow up was that they were going to drop a song every week, and they ended up posting those tracks on a joint SoundCloud called Hikari Ultra, which was being run by Righteous P, ZillaKami's older brother, and the brains behind the entire operation, with Hikari Ultra eventually becoming more than a SoundCloud account and eventually morphing into a full-on label that would not only manage City Morgue, but another artist too named NYCL Kai. In March of 2017, Zilla would drop Gang Shit with GCSY, notable for also having art by Dirty Butt, another prominent underground trap metal artist who made art at that point but also makes music, followed up by another track with Sos Mula called Bukaki, which actually had a little bit of drama circulating around it because it was actually released on a Landfill beat, and if you don't know who Landfill is, that's actually Syringe or Cyber, who's a pretty prominent trap metal artist in his own right, but when it comes to making beats, he goes under a different alias, being Landfill, and after ZillaKami ended up using this track, Cyber was actually pretty upset with him already using the beat for his song Young Emperor, leading to a little bit of a Twitter spat that never really went anywhere, with ZillaKami basically saying that he was a really big fan of Cyber and that he only wanted to make a beat on the song because it was fun and not to try to make any money off of it, but Syringe wasn't really having it, and we don't know if ZillaKami and Syringe are on good terms at this point, but either way, it's kind of interesting to note. It's not like Zilla wasn't making any money off of his music, because at this point, Sos Mula and ZillaKami would start doing paid features, with ZillaKami doing a couple features with It's Okay to Cry on the track Shimigami Starship, as well as a song called Fuck with some random SoundCloud rapper named Saint Poncho, and funnily enough, this track also led to a little bit of controversy, basically because a bunch of fans would start to re-upload the track without Saint Poncho's verse on it, and apparently Poncho thought that ZillaKami was behind this, so he started to call him out online, but once again, it never really led to anything, and probably only gave more attention to ZillaKami's music. And Sos Mula would also do a paid feature with an artist known as Guap Mizzle on the track Dust. And these two would later fall out as well, although we don't really know the reason for that. After that came another combo track called Skate Witch, as well as Sos dropping a solo track called Devil's Advocate, with Zilla also creating a 2-track EP called Life is a Horror Movie. There was only 2 tracks on this EP, known as The Witch and the Cauldron. They're not very good, and they're basically sad boy weepy music, which I'm definitely not a fan of, and apparently ZillaKami wasn't a very big fan of it either, because he ended up deleting it only a couple months later. After that, the two of them ended up dropping a track together called Bum Bucket, with Sos Mula also also going on to do a feature with Dave East on the track Home Invasion, which is actually a pretty big deal considering how big of a deal Dave East was at the time and how underground Sos Mula still was. After that, Sos Mula would drop another random solo track with a Russian name before ZillaKami would then drop another track with GCSY called Warpaint. So at this point you would think that people would know that Zilla and Sos Mula were a duo with them dropping so much music together, but every time that ZillaKami would drop a track with GCSY, it ended up becoming a lot bigger than the stuff that he was dropping with Sos, so people still mostly knew him for working with them. And I'm not trying to say that GCSY was bigger than ZillaKami at the time. I think it more so came down to the fact that they looked a lot more cohesive as a group compared to Sos Mula and ZillaKami, who basically looked like polar opposites. After that, ZillaKami would do another feature with a guy named Mike Renegade on a track called Billy Blanks, and by the time that all of that music came out, 6ix9ine was already making his track with Famous Dex called Zeta Zero, and you already know there was a big controversy with Thrax taking the song down for being on a stolen beat.
Tell that shit to anyone. I gave it to you and Zilla. You used it and Zilla used it.
Well, I can't hear you, bro. You sound like you chewing on peanut butter.
But the weirdest part about this whole situation is that ZillaKami and Sos Mula would actually take Famous Dex's verse off of Zeta Zero and put it on a Yuckmouth remix, which apparently was official. I'm not really sure if it was or not, but considering this was back in the SoundCloud days and they weren't yet signed to a label, it wouldn't surprise me if they actually did put this out. But immediately after that, Zilla ended up dropping another track with GCSY called Are You Ready Kids, which ended up becoming a big hit, getting posted on Boyd Tracks and running up thousands of views on SoundCloud. And even to this day, it sits at over 1 million views on YouTube, so you can see that it was definitely a big hit for the time. But immediately after that, ZillaKami and Sos Mula would drop their biggest hit to date, known as Sinners 13, which ended up doing about as well as Are You Ready Kids, although it didn't become a massive hit until it got a music video on World Star Hip Hop the following year. So for now, Sos Mula and ZillaKami would have to keep working, dropping more tracks, and running their buzz up a little bit more in the underground scene before they broke their way into the mainstream. But when it came to GCSY and ZillaKami, this was basically the last collaboration they had together. They would drop one more track together, but at this point ZillaKami had already gained an ego and didn't really care what happened with the music that they made together because he was already 100% City Morgue and didn't really care about GCSY anymore. It came down to the fact that ZillaKami really only wanted to use it as a business relationship, where Cameron Ozzy actually wanted to be friends with ZillaKami, and from what I've heard, a lot of ZillaKami's relationships are basically only business. I mean, him and It's Okay to Cry only hit each other up when they want to make music, and it's even a bit debatable if ZillaKami and Sos Mula are actually friends or if they only work together. I mean, it kind of seems like the latter considering there's over a decade of age between the two and there's probably not a whole lot in common between them. But anyways, getting back to the music, they would then drop a remix of Bum Bucket with an artist named Yardine, with Sos Mula going on to drop a couple features with an artist known as Rico Sama, as well as another one named Young Guther, and then ZillaKami would end up dropping the track Jungle Clips with Zarkon, basically starting off his career. And by the way, Zarkon has admitted this is what started his career off, so I don't want anybody in the comments saying that Zarkon did it on his own. ZillaKami definitely helped him out, which is actually a good thing because it shows that Zilla definitely wanted to help put on smaller artists at the time, or at least that would be the case, but Zarkon actually had to pay ZillaKami for this feature, so once again there was no real friendship and it was only a business transaction. At this point, GCSY would drop one more Zilla featured track called Squad Up, which ended up going on their mixtape Live Life Giving Hell, with Sos and Zilla going on to drop their track Fuck That in November 2017, right around the same time that their number one op 6ix9ine just got a Billboard hit with his track Gummo, where he actually dissed Sos Mula. Although that was only on the snippet version, because in the actual release version he ended up cutting that line out, which I don't know if that's more disrespectful or less disrespectful. But either way, 6ix9ine was about to go on a legendary run, taking over the entire mainstream rap game, and Sos Mula and ZillaKami were still struggling in the underground, with them finally ending off the year 2017 by dropping one more track on SoundCloud called Drop Dead, which did pretty well, but at this point they were probably feeling pretty burnt and overshadowed by 6ix9ine. So at this point they had to go back to the drawing board if they wanted to take over in 2018. A lot of people were definitely vibing with their songs, they were gaining a lot of attention and doing pretty good numbers, but if they really wanted to be big time stars, they were going to have to show more of themselves, doing interviews and music videos. Because after all, that's how they initially got attention on 6ix9ine, by dropping videos like Shimigami, Yokai, Helsing Station, so they had to take that to the next level and get everybody to pay attention, which they finally ended up doing in February 2018 when they dropped a music video for Sinners 13 on World Star Hip Hop. And this video was absolutely crazy at the time. They had fire, they had people on motorcycles, they had people on skateboards, they had crazy looks, bike drills, and basically everything they needed to get people's attention. And just just like that, everybody online was reacting to this new demonic rap group that was coming out of the underground. They had never seen anything like it, and back then, all the shock value definitely helped them out. Although it would mean that they would have to take the video down a couple times to edit out some of the more intense scenes, and I can't really show you any of this video due to the fact that almost everything in it would piss YouTube off, but if you haven't seen it, definitely go check it out. It's definitely a generational video, and if you have, well, that's probably why you're here, because I doubt there's any City Morgue fans who haven't seen this video yet. It's definitely the one that put them on the map, and after this point, they were primed to take over the entire underground scene, as well as break their way into the mainstream. This was immediately followed up by their next music video for the track 33rd Black Glass, which they actually ended up previewing at South by Southwest when they were performing there, showing a bunch of their fans the upcoming music video before it even came out. And when it did finally come out, it took the internet by storm, with many people reacting to just how crazy and edgy it was, with a lot of people calling City Morgue next up. And funnily enough, a lawyer actually ended up reacting to this video, telling them how much illegal stuff they were doing in the music video, which is kind of foreboding for what's about to come, but we'll get to that when we get to that. During this period, Sos Mula would continue to do features, including a track with Super Love and Lil Toenail, as well as doing a song called Death to All, which I wish I could remember who was on that track, but let's just move on. Meanwhile, ZillaKami would sell a feature to an artist named Brock Steezy, who ended up putting that feature on a song called Want 'Em Dead, featuring Flacco and King. Hi King. And at this point, you can definitely tell that Sos Mula was trying to form genuine connections with other people in the underground, where ZillaKami was more so just selling features and then never talking to the artist again, which I definitely do understand. He was bigger at this point, but it goes to show that once ZillaKami became a big time star, he basically left the underground behind altogether. A lot of people get on 6ix9ine for doing the exact same thing, but the more you look into it, ZillaKami and 6ix9ine are really two peas in a pod in more ways than one. I know that's very foreboding, but we'll get to that when we get to the After that, the Morgue would drop another music video on World Star Hip Hop for their track Skatehead, which is actually the first appearance of those iconic eye scar tattoos that would later cause friction between them and Trippie Redd, but I'm not going to talk too much about that in this video. If you want to know more, go check out the many beasts of ZillaKami. After that, ZillaKami would drop a track with Burn Kaz called Red Rum, showing that he was still willing to put people on from time to time, but for the most part, he was starting to do less and less features. In the summer of 2018, both Zilla and Sos would appear on the No Jumper podcast. Surprisingly, it was called the ZillaKami and Sos Mula interview instead of the City Morgue interview, not really sure why, but either way, they brought along with them Righteous P. They made sure to shout out Thrax, calling him the third member of City Morgue at that point, and they would also wear Missing Sense Thursday, which was the clothing design created by Scumbag Chad, so basically all the pieces were in play. Righteous P made sure to put everybody in the right spot to play their part perfectly, making sure that City Morgue would eventually blow up, and then he was finally able to sign them to the record label Hikari Ultra, signing them to Republic Records. So at this point, apparently they were only signed as a group, meaning that ZillaKami and Sos Mula could still do solo work on their own, but eventually they would both sign solo deals with the record label as well, meaning basically all of their music after this point would be controlled in some form or another. But it's not like they would fall off immediately. They actually ended up playing a sold-out show in New York City, which to people who come from New York is a very big deal, and immediately after that, all the fans were waiting for their next album to drop. Although some were wondering if this might be their peak, if all the shock value that they brought to the table was really all they had, and if they had any longevity in the rap game as a whole. But luckily for all their fans at the time, ZillaKami would immediately get a massive feature from Denzel Curry with the track Vengeance, which was actually a sequel to another track called Taboo, which was also a massive hit, so basically ZillaKami became an overnight success. This took him from an edgy shock rapper who was basically only getting attention for his visuals to somebody who actually had respect within the underground scene, with the massive amount of Denzel Curry's fans eventually becoming ZillaKami fans as well, and not to mention JPEG Mafia was also there, so basically everything was coming together. Immediately after that, they would do an interview on Mass Appeal, where you could definitely tell just how different both the members were from each other, with Sos Mula talking about how much he loved the SoundCloud scene and how much he wanted to be a part of it, with ZillaKami basically only talking about old grunge bands and saying that he'd rather make that type of music than flat out rap. But either way, the fans liked both of the members, and even though ZillaKami was definitely becoming the bigger of the two members around this point, you didn't see a whole lot of Sos Mula hate until a little bit later on. After that, they would do a Genius interview for 33rd Black Glass, where ZillaKami offhandedly mentioned that he didn't really like Thrax beats and that a lot of them were really trash.
We was in Muddy's studio, Thrax played a beat and I hated it. And
We had a bunch of beats that day.
Yeah, all of them were trash. And this was like the least trash one.
But that wouldn't come to a head until a little bit later on, because at this point they were finally ready to drop their first official album called City Morgue Volume 1, Hell or High Water. And basically this entire album was produced by Thrax, with fans absolutely loving it and asking for more. But unfortunately after that point, Thrax would start to produce for them less and less, and by the time they put out Volume 2, he wasn't really producing for them at all. But either way, that ended off 2018, and the boys were definitely looking strong at this point. You could tell that they were definitely on the come up. That first album was doing really well, and all the fans were starting to go crazy and couldn't wait for a tour, which they would have to wait a little while for, but either way, 2019 was basically the biggest year for City Morgue ever. They started off the year by dropping another music video for the track Nitro Cell off of the Be Patient EP, which is actually how I first became aware of them, and then after that they would drop a second music video for a track called Lamborghini Getaway off of City Morgue Volume 1. After that, Zilla would then appear on a track called Man Down alongside Lil Nar, and if you don't know who Lil Nar is, he's basically a fashion designer who created Narcotic, who would then become a rapper and basically copy all of ZillaKami's aesthetics before then switching over to a more Atlanta style and signing to Chief Keef, so definitely an interesting story there, but it probably was pretty weird for Zilla to see somebody copy him like that, but little did he know there was an entire scene of people in the trap metal community that were already copying him. But let's not get into all that right now, because Sos Mula would also drop a music video on No Jumper alongside a rapper named Gotti Moreno on the track Slumped, so that was another big hit for Sos. A couple months after that, they would appear on Noisy Raps to do another interview, where this time Righteous P would actually blur out his face. I'm not really sure why he does this. It might be for an aesthetic, or maybe there really is something going on there, but either way, he would continue to blur his face from here on out. 6ix9ine was also briefly mentioned in this interview, letting a lot of new fans know that they used to rock with him all the way back in 2016, but at this point 6ix9ine was already in prison for racketeering charges, so most people thought that he wouldn't make a comeback, giving City Morgue just enough space to escape his shadow once and for all and really start doing their own thing. Although they definitely couldn't escape being asked about him in every single interview until the end of time, with people even bringing him up in 2023 long after he fell off. I'm especially looking at you, Brandon Buckingham, as well as you, Adam22. The two of you really got to stop asking those questions over and over and over again, but it is what it is. Let's move on. After that, Sos Mula would hop on a track called Enwrong with Zarkon before then dropping a small EP called Cleanup Crew, and ZillaKami would drop a 2-song EP called German Dogs, which aren't really important in the grand scheme of things, but if I didn't bring them up, fans would definitely go crazy. The two of them would then appear on a feature with Puya called Bulletproof Shower Cap before then dropping the first single off City Morgue Volume 2, As Good as Dead, called Dog, which actually never ended up showing up on the album at all. They would then go on to hype the project up more by appearing on Montreality before then attending Grey Day in 2019, which was a really big deal. They also went to Rolling Loud, so at this point they were doing big time stages and everybody really wanted a tour, but that would only come after they finally released Volume 2. This album came out to pretty mixed reviews. Nowadays it's pretty fondly looked back upon, probably because it came out during the peak of City Morgue, but back then fans had a lot of criticism. They weren't happy that Thrax wasn't producing on this album. They were really tired of Sos Mula, saying that his ad-libs were a little bit too much and it was time for ZillaKami to cut him loose. They didn't really like how they deviated away from their classic style and made a more sad, downtrodden type of album. I do think that fans should have appreciated it a little bit more, because this was basically the only time that they were willing to switch up their style on a classic City Morgue project. After this, we got the same album over and over and over again, but either way, in my opinion, it's definitely the worst album they ever put out. It's too long, it's too different, and I really don't like it, but if you do, that's okay. But with this project finally coming out, fans were hyped up to see the two solo projects coming from Sos Mula and ZillaKami that they promised all the way back in 2018 on the No Jumper podcast. I mean, let's be honest, they were basically only excited for ZillaKami's solo project. They didn't really care what Sos Mula was gonna do, but either way, they were ready for the group to break up and start doing different things. But instead, they immediately headed on their first tour, the Good is Dead tour, which ended up doing really good with a lot of fans showing up and getting to see their music live for the first time. They also had an opener on this tour called YCNL Kai, who ended up getting signed to Akari Ultra, which definitely seemed like a big opportunity for him, but after he realized that the label had absolutely no interest in putting any effort into him compared to the Morgue, he started lashing out, eventually leading to a fight on a tour bus where Sos Mula would knock him out, and after that, he was dropped from the label. After that, he never really told his side of the story. We basically only heard it from Sos Mula and ZillaKami. He would diss them here and there in the future, but for the most part, he was forgotten about, and the Morgue just kept getting bigger and bigger. By the time this tour wrapped up, it was 2020 and the pandemic was getting off to a start, which definitely hurt their momentum quite a bit, considering that City Morgue is really an act that thrives off of doing tours and doing shows and really getting their music out there live. And I'm not gonna lie to you, after this, it was basically never the same again. They definitely remained on a similar level, but they kind of started to grow stale stagnant, not really trying anything new or going out of the box that their fans have put them in. But apparently Sos Mula was actually kinda happy to get the time off from touring, with him going to the studio and recording song after song after song. Apparently he has over 1,000 unreleased songs in the vault at this point, and he was working on his own solo album as well. In May of 2020, they ended up releasing a deluxe version of Volume 2, which also had a feature from NASCAR Aloe, as well as a song called V2, which was kinda interesting because it was really the first time that we heard Sos Mula go into this new, different style. A lot of people would describe it as him biting Playboi Carti, but in my opinion, he sounded a lot less like a demon and a lot more like a vampire, if you get what I mean. That was followed up in July by a mixtape called Toxic Boogaloo, which was actually pretty good. In fact, it seemed like a return to form for the Morgue, with Sos Mula really shining through. Not to mention, basically the entire album was a big FU to 6ix9ine after he snitched, with a bunch of lines dissing him and calling him out for that. And unlike a lot of artists who called out 6ix9ine basically saying, yo, you're a rat, haha, you're a snitch, they actually had a lot to say about him, basically tearing down his persona within the lyrics. And overall, it was a really great project. After I kind of fell out with them after Volume 2, this one really brought me back, and I have to say after that, I was once again a fan. In 2021, ZillaKami would really start to hype up his next solo project known as Anti, before then switching the name over to Dogboy and dropping a bunch of singles. We got stuff like Chains, Frosty, Bleach featuring Denzel Curry, Badass featuring Lil Uzi Vert, and at this point, it definitely felt like ZillaKami was really gonna break through and become a massive star with all these big time features, with him even appearing on a Trippie Redd album called Neon Shark on the track Dead Desert alongside Scarlord, which wasn't a good track by any means. In fact, that entire album is really bad, but it didn't really matter because he was getting alongside big time names, and it felt like ZillaKami was about to be the biggest artist to ever come out of trap metal, and on top of that, the biggest artist to ever come out of the underground post 2018. And while Zilla was doing all that, Sos Mula would drop his first solo project called 13 Songs to Die To, which honestly I had no expectations for whatsoever, but it actually really blew me away, and at that point I became a lot bigger of a fan of Sos and his new style. But that was basically a teaser platter for ZillaKami's solo project, because that's what everybody was waiting for, with him finally dropping the project in September 2021 to a lot of fanfare. But I'm going to be honest with you, I was kind of disappointed by it. I really felt like this was going to be ZillaKami's version of 17, that one album that really blew him up and turned him into a mainstream star, but instead it was basically what I expected. Some decent grunge music, a little bit of yelling, but overall nothing that special. And at this point you could definitely tell that ZillaKami was getting complacent. With no real competition in the trap metal space, it kind of just felt like ZillaKami didn't care anymore, with him falling into complete apathy after this point and never dropping another solo project, leaving fans waiting 4 whole years for something new with nothing ever coming out. And that couldn't be felt more by the next City Morgue project, City Morgue Volume 3, Bottom of the Barrel. And this is when a lot of fans really started to be out on the group. They felt like they were making the same generic music over and over again. And I know what you're thinking, they tried to do something different with Volume 2 and fans didn't like it, and then they went back to that classic style with Volume 3 and then fans still didn't like it. What's up with that? Well, that's basically rap fans in a nutshell. You're gonna have to deal with that no matter what type of genre you're in. After that, they ended the year off with another tour, a chorus called Bottom of the Barrel, and they continued on that tour throughout 2022. And around this time, you can really start to see Sos Mula breaking away from City Morgue, starting up his own clothing brand called the 2000s, and not really rocking with that MST anymore. He also ended up dropping his second solo project called Too High to Die, which in my opinion definitely wasn't as good as 13 Songs to Die To, but either way it was still something different and I enjoyed it at least a little bit. And he would also start working heavily with an artist known as OTL Beezy, who is the absolute goat of the trap metal scene, dropping a project together called Body Bag Music, but unfortunately not long after that they actually ended up falling out as well. It turns out Sos Mula's fans really didn't like this guy and they didn't want Sos Mula to work with him anymore, and eventually Sos ended up tweeting something out basically saying that he wasn't going to work with struggle rappers anymore, and for some reason OTL Beezy thought that Sos Mula was talking about him even though he wasn't, and he decided to leak a couple songs that they had together, leading them to fall out and never work together again, which was a really bad move on OTL Beezy's part, because at this point without Sos Mula he's basically fallen into obscurity and nobody really talks about him anymore unless they're making a joke. But like I said before, he's the GOAT, we should all respect him. And during the time that Sos Mula was doing all that, ZillaKami really wasn't doing much of anything. He dropped a couple features with artists like Jerry Johnson, as well as a feature with Appel 8, I think that's how you say his name. But really what all the fans were waiting for was him to announce something about his upcoming album called Audio Creep, which was meant to be the sequel to Dog Boy, but like I said before, he never ended up dropping that, and fans just kept waiting longer and longer, eventually getting more and more upset. A lot of people would blame the label for this, but ZillaKami ended up saying that he really liked Republic Records and that they didn't didn't really make him do any work, which he really enjoyed, and you can definitely tell that ZillaKami's getting very lazy at this point. But either way, in 2023, we would finally get new music from them, with them dropping City Morgue Volume 4, My Bloody America, or actually apparently it's not Volume 4, it's a completely different thing. But either way, we finally got a new album with a new sound, with the Morgue switching it up, and now of course I'm kidding. It was the same old tired type of music that fans have been listening to for years, and at this point everybody was basically fed up with it. But a lot of fans didn't really care either. They were happy that the album finally came out, and apparently this was going to be the final album that City Morgue ever did together, and they were really going to break up after that point, with them going on one final tour that was supposed to be their big send-off, with fans showing up in droves to finally say goodbye to the group that they loved so much for so many years. With it finally wrapping up, and Sos Mula and ZillaKami walking away from each other once and for all, and no, of course that didn't happen. They actually ended up announcing another mixtape together called Bombs in the Mail, as well as another tour in 2024, and at this point a lot of fans didn't know how to feel, because after all it was kinda good they were staying together, but together they were definitely growing stagnant, so almost everything was banking on their next couple solo projects, the new Sos Mula project called Sleaze Religion, as well as Audio Creep, if that ever was going to come out, with fans actually getting so upset with ZillaKami for not dropping it that they hacked into his email, basically stole the album, and told him that if he didn't drop it in the next couple months they were going to leak it themselves. But of course Zilla wouldn't listen, and they actually ended up leaking it on Discord in early 2024, with him going on Instagram Live to basically cry about it. But at this point fans didn't really feel bad, because after all they'd already been waiting for it for over 4 years, so finally getting to hear it in any capacity, even though it wasn't official and fully mastered, was definitely a win. And then after that, City Morgue would go on the Bombs in the Mail tour, despite the fact the actual mixtape wasn't out yet, so that's kinda weird, but either way, fans once again showed up in droves. Although you can definitely tell from a lot of footage from this tour that it was definitely a lot more low budget than their prior ones. It seems like they were in smaller venues, their mics didn't even turn on at a couple shows, and overall it was a little bit of a mess, but that's kind of what you expect with the City Morgue show. And with all that said, that basically brings us up to modern day, where ZillaKami ended up dropping a track with Snot called Zero, as well as dropping another track on BLP Kosher's album, which is definitely kind of cool, but we all know it's coming, so I gotta say it. The ZillaKami allegations would break only a couple days before I recorded this video. I ended up covering the whole thing, and at this point, Zilla seems pretty guilty, and even if he's not, his reputation is definitely hurting. And even Sos isn't really trying to bail him out. He's basically had nothing to say about the situation whatsoever. He's only trying to advertise more merch for Sleaze Religion, which is kind of funny, but at the same time, I feel like if he was innocent, Sos Mula might try to have something to say. I know it's kind of early to speak on their downfall. I'm not saying they're going to completely disappear whatsoever. In fact, Sos Mula hasn't really done anything wrong at this point, at least no allegations have come out against him. So hopefully he keeps going, because after all, I really like Sos Mula and don't want to see him get into the same situation, but ZillaKami seems like he's cooked. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that everybody was basically waiting for him to fall. He really had nothing to do with trap metal after 2022. He never did features with smaller artists. He never tried to put anybody on. There's even instances where fans talk about meeting him in person and he comes off as very standoffish and doesn't really want to talk to anyone. So it seems like he really didn't appreciate his fame after all. The only difference between him and 6ix9ine is that he was a lot better at hiding everything he was doing behind the scenes, but the truth is out now. His persona is cracking away. The fans seem like they don't want to be a part of it anymore, with them cutting off their City Morgue patches. It's never been so overdue. People are selling their merch, so at this point, I gotta say, it's over, man. It's sad to see that after 7 years of these guys being so prolific, being the heroes of the underground and basically the underdogs that made it into the mainstream, really showed that anyone could do it, ended up being just like everybody else. But unfortunately, that writing might have been on the wall all along. And if you like trap metal music, if you like underground music, and you like this video made it to the end, make sure to leave a knife emoji in the comments below. Shout out to Knife Gang, shout out to Green Bean Gang, shout out to the gang that's the gang that's the gang. Subscribe to the channel, check out my second channel as well, where I've covered all the allegations of ZillaKami, and those videos are going crazy. And besides that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
Booty meat.